The Mother of Invention and Mother Russia by Jeremy Mack. There's an old saying, necessity is the mother of invention, meaning when you have to get something done, you will find a way to do it. And most of the time, the new way is discovered through exploring paths you previously had no need to venture down. How does this apply to the current environment of sanctions by the West on old Mother Russia? Let's discuss it. Russia did not just start yesterday trying to circumvent Western sanctions. Russia and her unlikely ally China have both seen and felt the sting of sanctions before. I say they are unlikely allies because Russia is a nation whose roots are Christian. Moscow is called the Third Rome by the Christian East, obviously Rome being the first Rome and Constantinople being the second. So while they both have a communist past, France does as well, as France exported communism to Russia, they have no real cultural basis for being political allies. This is the first way that necessity is the mother of invention. It invented a strategic alliance between Russia and China. And this alliance has given birth to some strategic organizations that are being built in the East at the present time that most Americans are unaware even exist. First, the need to circumvent U.S. sanctions created the BRICS nation group. BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The organization was formed back in 2009. Don't slide it. 3 of these nations have the largest populations in the world, and one of their stated goals is the de-dollarization of the world's financial markets. They want, as a publicly stated policy goal, a global reserve currency pegged to a basket of currencies of which the U.S. would be only one. This would allow global payment settlements to be made with any of the currencies in the reserve basket. In other words, do you need oil? They want to make it possible for you to exchange dollars, rubles, won, or rupees at a fixed ratio for oil purchases and for other commodities as well, where before you had to exchange everything for dollars to make those purchases. This would cause major disruptions in the U.S., but more on that in a minute. Secondly, both Russia and more importantly, China have both created options to the SWIFT system. What is the SWIFT system? It is the electronic messaging system that communicates between banks for settling payments around the world, and we essentially own it. But China has been working on a second rail for payments called the CIPS, and Russia has been building a third rail called the SPFS. And they did not start this project yesterday afternoon. They have been working feverishly at it for 13 years. Here's the truth of the matter laid out by Pepe Escobar in his recent article, Follow the Money, How Russia Will Bypass Western Economic Warfare. He starts by quoting from a Bloomberg article entitled Wall Street Counsels Washington Against Kicking Russia Off SWIFT, published February 25th, 2022. Quoting, booting Russia from the critical global system, which handles 42 million messages a day and serves as a lifeline to some of the world's biggest financial institutions, could backfire, sending inflation higher, pushing Russia closer to China, and shielding financial transactions from scrutiny by the West. It might also encourage the development of a SWIFT alternative that could eventually damage the supremacy of the US dollar. Pepe Escobar's comments are important for our discussion on this passage, as you may be laboring under the misconception that Russia is completely trapped by US sanctions. Pepe Escobar writes, from Moscow's point of view, that's a minor issue, being kicked off the SWIFT system. A number of Russian banks are already connected to China's CIPS system. For instance, if someone wants to buy Russian oil and gas with CIPS, payment must be in the Chinese yuan. CIPS is independent of SWIFT. Additionally, Moscow already linked its SPFS system not only to China, but also to India and member nations of the Eurasia Economic Union. SPFS already links to approximately 400 banks worldwide. With more Russian companies using SPFS and CIPS even before they merge, and other maneuvers to bypass SWIFT, such as barter trade, largely used by sanctioned Iran and agent banks, Russia could make up for at least 50% in trade losses. I'll link to Pepe Escobar's entire article, Follow the Money, How Russia Will Bypass Western Economic Warfare. Along with parallel payment systems, there are also multiple creative and effective trade agreements in place as well. There's the Eurasian Economic Union, which came into existence in 2015, linking Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Armenia and Kyrgyzstan have been in friendly talks to join. Then there is a Chinese venture that is a very serious competitor to the US, the Belt and Road Initiative. Since 2013, China has been investing heavily in the infrastructure of more than 70 nations. They've been building ports, bringing poor countries' tech up to snuff for trade purposes, investing in forming a middle class in those countries to develop markets for the future sales of Chinese goods, and most importantly, creating nations indebted to them and not to us. So behind the scenes and out of the headlines of the American propaganda puppets, the US media, is the reality that the East, who thinks in centuries rather than years, has been working to undo our hegemony in order to avoid sanctions and free themselves from our influence for years. So if you think Russia was surprised by the West's actions and entered Ukraine without a plan to move their money around, I would suggest you rethink that idea. This is the reality of the situation, not what CNN tells you or what the public school system forgot to tell you. All the other nations of the world are not idiots. You see, both before globalists in the West started treating truckers as an unwashed mass of peasants, the globalists already had shown their disdain for the unwashed masses of the rest of the world. So what do I expect the next few months and years to bring? I expect, number one, China to quietly aid Russia in sales of oil as they do Iran currently, keeping her afloat and selling Mother Russia to Father China. This is a bigger problem than we realize. I expect, number two, the de-dollarization of large portions of the world's financial markets. I expect, number three, Eurasia will likely come under Russian and thus Chinese military and financial influence. I expect, number four, China will move to take Taiwan back, and we will do what we are doing with Ukraine, send money and weapons to make a fair show, but acquiesce in the end begrudgingly. I expect, number five, the US will recede back to North America and will become what she was before World War I, a powerful nation in the world, but not an empire-wielding superpower. If you think this sounds hopeless, it's not, and I'll explain that at the end, but I have more bad news. De-dollarization will likely bring a period of hyperinflation to America. This will be followed by a period of interest rates higher than you've ever heard of for longer than you can imagine. Finally, then, we will get a massive deflation as the excess dollars are destroyed by loan defaults and resale of debt for pennies on the dollar. That's the path back to a healthy economy where goods are affordable. The globalists bemoan deflation, but the inflation is cheaper prices, just as a result of inflation is higher prices. Why will this cause massive inflation? Because the banks of the world right now are full of US dollars that are needed for exchanges in order to purchase goods on the open market. That's what it means to be a reserve currency. Your currency is used in international settlement. When the world moves to a basket of currencies as a reserve, and let's say the US still makes up 75% or 50% of 4 or 5 currencies initially, that still means that 25 to 50% of the dollars around the world will come crashing back into our economy and will not go back out to the world's banks again, as had been the case. All that extra liquidity will massively inflate the money supply very quickly. And even if the reserve currency doesn't change for a lot of the world stage in the immediate future, dislocating Russia from it will cause a significant portion of dollars to come back to the US. Russia being kicked off the SWIFT system will cause all her dollar reserves to be sold and not repurchased. Also, don't be surprised to see China sell some of the treasuries they own of ours as well. Why will this cause interest rates to rise? The way you slow inflation down is by slowing spending down. If the money doesn't enter the market, then market prices don't rise. The way you incentivize people to hold on to money, we call this saving money, in case you've forgotten, is by offering an enticing interest rate so people park it and don't spend it. That's why the Fed is talking about raising rates right now. They want you to stop spending and start saving, which has been the opposite approach really since the end of World War II. The man that invented this scheme, John Maynard Keynes, said, in the end, we're all dead. So don't save, spend, spend. When they say, hey guys, we need you to boost aggregate demand, they're just saying, please go buy something, anything. The interest rate that will be needed to entice people to hold on to weak money that's losing value quickly will be very high. In 1980, interest rates ran up to 18% or better to quell stagflation. One can only imagine what will happen to the housing market during this period, and it boggles the mind to consider what the interest rate will need to be to keep you and me from exchanging our worthless money for goods with actual value. Now, why will this cause a massive deflation eventually? When money is weak, spending power is poor. You get less for the money. It takes the bang out of the buck. Buying less will leave excess goods. Remember your basic high school economics here. Supply and demand dictate prices. Lots of supply with weak money that is able to buy very little of those goods will cause falling demand, which leads to deflation. When producers start lowering prices to try and get you to buy again, when you start buying again, that's where the actual price should be. That's what you're willing to pay for it. That's a market correction. Remember, in a free market, it is the consumer that sets prices, not the producer. What are you willing to pay? What can you pay? We will be forced for a period because of changes in the global financial markets to defer our purchases because we can't pay for them until enough defaults on our debts have occurred so that the dollar price is one we can afford again. That's how too much money, inflation, is destroyed, deflation, to bring prices back to the true price of a good or service. The mechanism is debt defaults. Let me give you an example. If you bought something for $1, but then you sell it for 25 cents because no one wants to pay $1 for it anymore, 75 cents are destroyed in the sales. That's what we mean by destroying additional money. And so that's how debt defaults destroy additional money and create deflation. It deflates the monetary supply because that money evaporates. It goes away because what you paid for it is $1 and what you sold it for is 25 cents. The difference, which would have been profit if it was reversed, is deflation, or the destruction of dollars in the opposite direction. So you can understand. The mechanism is debt defaults. That's how money is deflated, which are assets that were purchased with debt that were defaulted on, repossessed by the lender, and then sold to a new buyer at a discount, often pennies on the dollar. Ask people who bought houses in America in 2009. You got a great price after the Great Recession reduced housing prices through mortgage defaults. And that's how prices fall back to the correct price for that good and balance is restored to the economic force. Why will this be a good thing? For one, this is the true cause of the wealth gap, which is often used as a political ploy to lobby for more government intervention in order to correct it. The wealth gap is created through artificially low interest rates. Artificially low interest rates spur people who otherwise could not buy a house, for instance, to be able to buy one. This stimulates demand, lowers supply, and increases prices. If one is an owner during low interest rates, your property increases in value due to a hot housing market. Your wealth goes up because your asset increases in price. This is called the wealth effect. High interest rates will cause defaults and the evaporation of this paper wealth. During corrections, the wealth gap decreases as housing prices fall back to accurate pricing and become affordable again for more people. These are the right people too, as they were the wise people who were not hoodwinked by greed and bad economics. They waited through a period of inflated pricing in order to get a good buy, because everyone who is good with money knows money is made on the buy, profit is only realized in a sale. Second, the jobs we sent overseas to 8 other countries and create an indebtedness to our markets were the jobs of the middle class and especially the poor. Without meaningful work, the dignity of people is damaged. Man was designed to be productive, to work, and to create. There's a direct link between the policies of globalism and the epidemic of opioid overdoses in this country. Hopelessness and joblessness make people unstable and unhappy. We must return to seeking a reasonable national self-sufficiency because the goal under that regime is not how cheap can we get goods, but how can we as a nation create meaningful work that supplies for our own needs with our own hands. This was America before World War II, a people with strong manufacturing and a strong currency. We could afford to buy our own goods. Inflated money supply weakened our purchasing power and drove us to purchase goods from other countries with low labor costs, i.e. China. China's economy has been built on the back of our need for cheap goods because we've weakened our money. Now, productivity is more than money, however. When we talk about being a productive nation or a producer nation, productivity is more than money, however. The feeling one gets from planting a garden or baking your own bread or painting a room has value that we forget. We feel it as individuals, but we fail to think about its more corporate expression, national versus individual. The only value of a thing is not the dollar value. There are other values we have to weigh next to price. Values like being a good nation or being a productive nation, a creator nation, a creditor nation. These all have rewards we have forgotten. This is how we were pre-World War I. We were an industrialized nation that produced goods, avoided debt, and prolonged self-gratification. We saved. This is what allowed us to essentially rescue Europe in World War I and become the leader of the free world after World War II. We saved and built from savings. And this condition, when it visits us again after this turbulent period, if we remember our Christian roots along with it, will restore a necessity for us to return to inventing things ourselves instead of consuming them. It will restore to us our humility and our work ethic. But for now, there's another necessity at work in Russia, one that we created, and one I believe will accelerate the end of Western financial hegemony. The dollar's role now as the reserve currency wanes because necessity is the mother of invention. Russia and China have been driven to invention. The East is rising. Make of it what you will. I'm going to add a small piece here for those who make it all the way to the end. So if you read this entire piece and you make it this far, I'm going to make some statements now. And if you want to hear more about them, directly message me. And if I receive enough direct messages, I will start doing in pieces and in parts something in regard to prophetic fulfillment. So I ended the article with, "The East is rising, make of it what you will." Let me quote to you now, Revelation 16:12. I'm going to add some pieces in there to show you why I find this very interesting. Revelation 16:12. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. So that's in Iraq. That's right where we just spent trillions of dollars fighting a war for 20 years that was nearly endless and had almost no goal. So the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. And for those of you that don't know, rivers of the ancient world, the Nile is Egypt, Euphrates, Iraq. So you also have other rivers in the Mesopotamian region that are great rivers. The Tigris, for instance, which produced Assyria. If you were to look at a map of the US, you would find almost all the major cities are either on ports or they're on major riverways because trade was a big part of waterworks is how we move things until we actually created the steam engine like 150 years ago. So when the bowl is poured down the great river Euphrates, it's in Iraq, and rivers are associated with the income, with money, with trade. All right. So it's poured out on the great river Euphrates and its water's dried up. So the finances of that region are evaporated. Okay. And what does this do? It prepares the way for the kings of the East. So Russia is partially in Europe and partially in Asia. Of course, China is all the way in Asia. So one of the things we would be looking for as far as prophetic fulfillment would be is a rise of the kings of the East. So my question is, are we watching the rise of the kings of the East right now? And are the policies that we've adopted towards the East over the last 20 years or so maybe even going back to the 70s, probably under Nixon in the first, so we could say probably 50 years toward China. Are these the policies that would make the way for the rising of the kings of the East? I think that's probably the case. If you make it this far and you want to hear more, as I said, message me. There's no guarantee I'm going to write on it, okay? But I do have some thoughts on these things. And if I have enough people that begin to think about read the work that I do and find interest and value in the thoughts that I have, then I will write more on these subjects. My interest is really to write and to have discussions that promote Christian thinking, a Christian worldview, but also revive some of the older understandings of prophecy and scripture. So none of that rapture business. We'll talk about, stuff that Kirk Cameron ain't involved in. No offense, Kirk. All right, blessings, everyone. If you have an interest, remember, message me. Thanks. Bye-bye.